Well, everybody, welcome. I'm really glad to see everybody here. This is Saving Democracy Through Donor Activism, and we're going to give you a briefing on our Crimson Goes Blueprint Q2 portfolio. I'm Janet Singer. I'm the founder and political director of Crimson Goes Blue, and today we're also here from Taylor Holden from Blueprint, and Say Ufat, who's the executive director of the New Georgia Project, which is one of the organizations we are funding, and Adam Blackwell, who's the development director at Swing Left. We hope that all of you will decide that your political giving should be done through the Crimson Goes Blueprint portfolio after you hear a little more about it. All of us, in this room know that this election is critical for Democrats. None of us wants to see Kevin McCarthy or Mitch McConnell back in charge of Congress, and we want to also ensure the integrity of our elections. So that is what this is about. Today, I'm going to give a little background on political giving and how we select the campaigns that we're recommending in the portfolio. Taylor is going to talk about how we vet the on-the-ground organizations, and she's going to have a conversation with NSA. And then we're going to talk about using our networks to increase strategic political giving. And of course, we're going to hope that all of you make a donation today, and we will leave plenty of time for questions and answers. If you have questions along the way, put them in the chat, and we'll answer them at the end. So before we really launch into Blueprint, I want to give you guys a taste of the blues. Now, I love the blues, the music, the blues, but I find that there's so many organizations that have blue in the title that it can get a little confusing. So the blues I want to talk to you about are Blueprint, Crimson Goes Blue, and Act Blue. So Blueprint is the instrument that helps Democrats win critical elections and build voter power by identifying the races and organizations to target with your political giving. So we, using Blueprint, we find paths for Democratic victory in the states and Congress, and we target competitive races and also organizations that work on voter outreach and fair elections work. Now, Crimson Goes Blue, which is the organization that I'm the political director of, we are a Harvard alumni group, and our mission is to forge a more just American democracy. And the Crimson Goes Blue portfolio is made in partnership with Blueprint, and it's a tool that we put together for our members so that they could give smartly their political donations to high impact races and organizations. And we got so excited about the portfolio that we wanted to share it with all our friends too. So we asked our members to invite their friends and family as well. And I'm really happy to see in the audience today that network is growing, because it's going to take all of us to win for the Democrats in the midterms. Now, Act Blue, I think a lot of people get confused about what Act Blue is, but I think of Act Blue as the banker. So they're the tool that lets Democratic candidates and progressive groups raise money from individual donors on the internet. And so we use Act Blue when you're giving to Blueprint, you'll be going to an Act Blue page, but we're not donating to Act Blue. We are just using them as the banker. So now, hopefully we've gotten Blueprint, Crimson Goes Blue, and Act Blue straight so that we can launch into talking about our portfolio. And I want to begin with a testimonial from one of our members about why she gives to Blueprint.
What I like about Blueprint is that they make my political spending more effective than it otherwise would be. They have data and algorithms that ensure that my contribution is going to go where it's needed most. Last election, I threw money at every race I could in my desperation, only to discover that some of those races would have been won anyway, and others had no chance of winning. So I'm very grateful to Crimson Goes Blue for connecting us to Blueprint so we can target our political giving to where it's going to make the most difference in saving our democracy.
Okay. So I know many of you have experienced Democratic giving as like this fire hose coming at you, and there's this frantic pace where you got a million different options for races to support. Once you give once, they come at you again and again, and it's really hard to be sure whether your contribution will make a difference. We know that we'd love to get money out of politics, but the reality is without funding, candidates can't win elections and organizations can't organize their communities that are involved in the electoral process. So about half of Democratic donations are wasted either on candidates that are going to lose no matter how much money we give them, or candidates that are going to win whether we support them or not. We're really trying to target those races that are close and where they can really make a difference, the money that you give. So how many of us? Yeah?
I'm just interrupting because your screen share is kind of covering a part of the slide. Can you bring it down so we can see the full panoply of your thoughts? Yeah, or up, that's fine. Great.
You can see it now? Okay, sorry.
Perfect. Thank you. No.
Thank you. So when we think about giving, you know, it's so easy to just give in the spirit of like, oh, I really want to get rid of Marjorie Taylor Greene. And I certainly would like to get rid of her, but she's in a district that went 75% for Trump. We're not going to beat her. Democrats have already given over $1 million to her challenger for an election that we're going to lose. And so I would much rather see that money go to a place where it can make the difference between winning and losing. So if you have struggled to figure out which campaigns to give to, or you don't have the time or inclination to do the research, we have the data gurus at Swing Left to help us, and Blueprint is for you. We focus on the races where your money, where what we do is small enough to win and big enough to matter, and that's how we're choosing. So I want to go through how we choose the Democratic candidates that we support. We look at which races are competitive, but not just competitive and consequential, right? There might be a competitive race for the Republican nomination in Wyoming, but regardless, we're going to have Republicans in Wyoming. So we're not focusing there. We're going to focus on states where there are winnable races for Senate, governor, and also state legislative races and the US House. When you look at this map, you can see the states that have these races, either Senate or governor or state house. And you can also see by color, the darker green are the states where the US House competitive races are. So that's where we're focusing our portfolio. We also look at when are the donations the most effective. So early money really makes a difference, because when you give early, campaigns can staff up, they can buy advertising space that is less expensive than it would be if they wait till the last minute. Much of giving is done at the end, but we really hope that folks are going to give early. This will help us protect and expand the Senate majority, hold the House, break Republican control in the state legislatures that often determine how elections are certified. So if you care about election integrity, these down ballot races are really important, and they're also a really good bang for the buck because they cost a lot less to run a candidate in a state legislature race, so your money goes farther for those. And so we're also looking at which places are we going to target. So for instance, in this Q2, we are supporting the Senate race in Pennsylvania. And that's partly, not only is it going to be a really competitive race that we can win, but the senators have raised the least money in that state for Democrats compared to some of the other Democratic senators who are going to run also in competitive races, but they're better funded. In the House, we're supporting California, Michigan, New York, and Pennsylvania congressional races, because those, that really the path to holding on to the House goes through those states. And then in the state House races, we're supporting Georgia and Pennsylvania. Both of those are places where election integrity is really threatened. So we're really trying to have a big impact there. So I'm going to turn it over now to Taylor Holden, who vets the groups that we fund, and let her tell you about that.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure if people can see me. I know I can't see myself. Oh, here I am. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for hopping on this call today. As Janet said, I'm a senior advisor to Blueprint, and in addition to being a longtime organizer from Texas, so I know how hard it is to organize in hard places. I have been a donor advisor for the past 4 years, and I've had the privilege to organize more than $200 million to more than 350 organizations in all 50 states. So I love civic organizations. That's what I'm going to talk to you about today, and why they're such a crucial part of the portfolio that you'll be given as part of your membership in Crimson Goes Blue. So whenever I talk about civic engagement organizations, there's a really vast constellation of them across the country, but the ones that Blueprint has opted to support are those organizations that conduct voter registration, voter protection, and voter turnout work or mobilization, as we call it. Part of the reason why we prioritize organizations conducting that work versus, like, let's say, polling and research, paid media via radio, television, or digital, investment in data acquisition and like improvement of data, and a number of other strategies, candidate recruitment and support. The reason why we do voter registration, protection, and mobilization is because, one, these strategies tend to be extremely cost effective. Two, they're targeted. You can actually track the dollar to voter investment across these programs. And three, whenever you're able to protect the right of voters to access polling locations, ensure that their ballots are counted fairly, and make sure that they're actually on the rolls through voter registration, that is a program that has a direct impact on win and loss scenarios versus, like, let's say something like data acquisition. So we prioritize organizations that conduct those kinds of programs. These organizations are incredible, and I can't wait for you to hear from INSEE UFOT pretty soon. They are entrepreneurs, they are visionary organizers who take action in elections out of an existential desire to improve their communities. It's not because it just feels good to elect Democrats, it's because they're looking for people who will be champions on matters relating to wages, accessible healthcare, affordable and accessible education, you name it. And the reason why they participate in elections is so that they can then hold that power to account, election to election, on a policy agenda that will improve people's lives. And in addition to that being true, it just works. So a pretty good example is actually what New Georgia Project has done. You know, since Stacey founded the organization and INSEE, took over about 7 years ago, the organization has actually funded more than 300,000 Georgians to vote. These are disproportionately Georgians of color. This is in the midst of some of the most draconian crackdowns on election access in the country that I know we've all been following. And I'm not sure if y'all know this, but whenever the election was stolen from Stacey in 2018, because it was, and she lost by about 52,000 votes, I'm not sure if people know, but more than 1.4 million voters were purged from the rolls by the governor in the 3 years leading up to that election. The reason why we can't just back candidates, but we have to back program is so that we can invest in and scale dynamic solutions to those kinds of problems. That is why Georgia is now, one of the country's newest battleground states, Georgia and Arizona. Whenever we decide which organizations we're going to support, we apply a pretty rigorous set of criteria and parameters to determine how do you winnow this really vast constellation of amazing civic engagement organizations to a short list. Ultimately, there are so many organizations deserving of funding beyond just the short list we present to you. But these are vetted programs where we can guarantee that every single dollar will go into registering, protecting, and turning out voters who will make the difference in a state decided by the narrowest margins. So these organizations have a number of things in common. One is they overlap with Swing Left's priority geography and electoral targets. Two is the organization has a demonstrated track record of impact and more than one cycle of experience. I want to hone in on this, why that's so important. The difference between putting $1 into a paid canvassing program led by an organizer who moved from out of state into another state versus investing in someone embedded in their community year over year, who people know through being neighbors with them, through being, part of like parent-teacher conferences and PTAs, through engagement in like local cultural events. The difference between the effectiveness of those communications is really incredible. One example I'll give you is one of the organizations Blueprint supports is a young voter engagement organization named RISE. And in 2020, they actually found that the young voters they targeted, communicated with, and turned out in states like Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and California, those young voters turned out at a rate between 20 and 30 percentage points higher than young voters who were not talked to by them in the exact same states. These are incredibly effective programs. The other thing about these programs is we prioritize investments in programs that are led by and for communities that have been chronically underinvested in, who also represent the backbone of the Democratic Party. We're talking about organizations led by and for Black leaders in communities, Asian American leaders in communities, Indigenous leaders, Latino and Hispanic leaders, young leaders. Not just because we have a moral imperative to do that, because these are voters who have been disproportionately targeted by the state and by voter suppression measures, but also tactically and strategically. White voters are with us, but not all of them. These are communities who, if we invest in them meaningfully, through persuasion, through education, through showing up for them on a policy agenda that will improve their lives and mobilization. If we do that, that will transform our ability to win in so many of these states. It's part of the path to victory that we saw in Georgia, which ultimately was a long-term strategy driven by and led by Black women. It's also part of the reason why Arizona flipped. The shift in Arizona has been led by and for immigrant communities and Latino and Hispanic communities who felt disproportionately targeted by Jan Brewer and by Joe Arpaio, both of whom they ousted. So, clearly I'm a fangirl, but the difference between giving to candidates only and giving to candidates and civic organizations is that you are putting dollars into permanent infrastructure that does not disappear after Election Day, that is an investment in putting more geographies, more places and races into play for the long term, even if we might lose in a short-term election cycle. And I think I'll stop there. I know that we're supposed to get started with an interview with INSAE soon.
First of all, we want to thank those of you who have already given. Hallelujah. Taylor, thank you so much. You guys can go right to it.
INSAE. Okay, I do just want to say, this is like a meeting of friends who haven't talked to each other in a long time. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. How are you, Taylor?
So good.
It's so good to see you. And it's good to be here with you all.
Yeah. We're so lucky that you're here. Well, I'm going to get things started with a few questions for you, and then we're going to open things up for questions for Crimson Goes Blue members. People really underestimate the time and effort that it took to orchestrate the political shift that you were a part of in Georgia in 2020 and in 2021. I'm wondering if you can tell us what went into making that historic victory happen in terms of New Georgia's work and the efforts of a unified community-based coalition.
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons why the wins that we are seeing in Georgia are likely to continue and are likely to be durable is because of how we've been going about achieving them. For folks who conventional political wisdom said that like basically the only places to contest for power for progressives was in Atlanta. And that when they think about Georgia, it's basically Atlanta and not Atlanta. But the truth of the matter is that there are 159 counties. Georgia has the second highest number of counties. And the losses that have been experienced in sort of this newest battleground state are happening in these battleground counties. And so one, I think just local intelligence and being able to really understand what is happening in Georgia, particularly when we're talking about 7 million people voted in the 2020 presidential election, the highest number, it's the high water mark for turnout. And the margin of victory for President Biden was just over 11,000 votes. So we're talking about 0.00015 percentage points. And so that's 10 votes in one precinct. That's 15 votes in another precinct. And so that is how elections will be won, but it's also how elections have been stolen in Georgia. And so having deep insight and understanding that with 159 counties, that means that there are 159 kings and queens of elections in Georgia. They fall all along the ideological spectrum, and they fall all along the competency spectrum. Some of them are extraordinary at their jobs, and some of them are not. And so understanding what has happened, a lot of what we do, because of the scope and the scale and the size of the campaigns that we have run, the voter registration efforts that we've run, as well as the GOTV efforts, again, with ourselves and in coalition with other civic groups, we have been able to conduct what I call stress tests. And so we know which of these counties are vulnerable. We have a sense of which points in the registration process, the voting process, the counting process, and the certification process where we are most vulnerable. We know where they've been attacked before. And so, yeah, I think that big picture, people don't understand that, yes, right, that we are known for having, added over 500,000 young people and people of color to Georgia's voter rolls. But the path to get there included robust and sophisticated campaigns that had a research element at its core, that had a robust field component, field and organizing, where we're moving feet into the streets, boots on the ground. There's a litigation, a legal element. We've had to sue, we have been sued in defense of laws that make it easier for Georgians to participate in our elections. There's a narrative and a communications effort that requires us to change how we talk about voter suppression and how we talk about elections and electoral participation altogether. And so we're doing those things constantly on the pathway to sort of building super voters. And super voters are just Georgians that we've identified who vote in every election in which they're eligible. And so durable infrastructure that's being built by a broad and diverse cross-section of society so that we can win. And there are actual real wins that Georgia voters and Georgia families recognize as wins, and then wins that we can defend beyond one election cycle.
I'm so glad, yeah, that you mentioned durability. And to your point, and I hope people understand this on this call, and say you've been a part of architecting in your state has taken years to develop relationships, relationship mapping with election administrators, opening of offices, training, and like you said, really sophisticated strategy. I think individual donors and philanthropy, sometimes I say this as somebody who works in it, has a tendency to think, oh, we got it. We're all done here. We can move on to the next battleground state, or to think that it won't cost as much to keep it as it did the first time to get it. I'm curious, what is it feeling like in the state right now? Do you feel that the resources you need to have durable power to hold on to the gains that you've helped make is in place?
No. I think that if we are to pause and evaluate the terrain in which we're headed into for these midterm elections, I get the impression broadly that there are campaigns and candidates and operatives and donors that are treating the 22 elections as if they are sort of a garden variety midterm elections. And this couldn't be anything but that, that there has been a sustained attack on our elections infrastructure, that there are huge Supreme Court cases that are deciding rights that we've held for 50 years or longer, and that which could have the streets on fire this year. And thinking about how to take that energy and electoralize it and focus it and channel it to this November, I think is just really, really important. And I don't see those conversations happening at scale. And I see a lot of hand wringing. There are a bunch of sort of social media political scientists who are super quick to remind us that the party in the White House tends to lose the midterms following, as if that is predictive of what we can face. And so I think that, in Georgia, there's definitely an attitude about the things that folks want to win for themselves and win for their families, and not half doing it. Like, I think Georgians tend to leave everything on the field, in addition to the sort of history making potential and the inspiration factor that is present in some of our elections. I think it's beyond just the ability to make history, that there are real things that we're fighting for. And there's a growing understanding that our elections are being attacked, and that in the marketplace of ideas, fewer and fewer people are buying what conservative Republicans are selling. And that in order for them to hold on to power, they have to cheat. And that if we don't have overwhelming participation this November, that overwhelming participation this November might be the only thing that we have that helps us avoid a constitutional crisis as we head into the November midterms. And we see, a continuation of the January 6th attacks.
That's right.
Amen.
Yeah. So.
I'd like to ask one more question before we move it to our friends on the call. I think Georgia's been a model for really beautiful multiracial coalition work, year over year work to improve the lives of community members, despite being in a really hard and hostile state, and of organizers like yourself who've understood that voter protection has to go hand in hand with persuasion and mobilization. When you think about the threats to Georgians being able to cast their ballots and have those ballots be counted fairly and equally this November, how is New Georgia responding?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we're doing in this moment is working with the American Bar Association and NACDL, the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. So we have this program, it's our voter protection program. And essentially, because with Senate Bill 202, Georgia Republicans have created 5 new voting crimes. 2 of them are felonies, 3 are misdemeanors. And the felonies carry with them a penalty of up to 10 years in prison and $100,000 for each Georgian, each voter, for each form. And we know that there are prosecutors, county prosecutors, that are going to lean into this new criminal power that they have. And so there aren't 1,000 lawyers in the country with expertise at the intersection of criminal defense law and voting rights law. And there hasn't been a need for one since the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed, but we're starting to see a growing prosecutions of voting and voting related behavior. And so we're working, number one, on our voter protection program, which includes training this new generation of lawyers at the intersection of, again, voting laws and criminal defense laws. I think the second thing is that in Georgia, there are 3,000 polling locations, and we plan to have volunteer coverage at about 1,000 of them. So understanding the voter experience, many of you know that Georgians have had to suffer through standing in line for 8, 9, 10 hours to vote before. And so as you know, we get better and smarter about how to combat that, how to address Georgians' needs. We still need to make sure that our volunteer network and our staff network has pretty robust coverage of problem precincts where we've seen voters be disrespected in the past. And I think lastly, with popular education and combating disinformation. These are still things that are super important. Young voters and Black voters are #1 targets for well-funded disinformation campaigns that are propagated by bad actors, both foreign and domestic. We used to joke, like, was it the Russians or the Republicans when we would see disinfo campaigns? And now I'm here to tell you that it doesn't matter, that this is nation destabilizing stuff that has the ability to encourage people to withdraw from public life altogether, to withdraw from the electoral process altogether. So it's not like they will vote for the wrong person. As a nonpartisan organization, we actually don't care. But we do care that people see voting as a worthwhile institution, a civic duty, a thing that they get to participate in as by virtue of their citizenship. And you know, having lies about elections being stolen, having the big lie continue to be propagated has done damage to people's faith in our election system. And so part of our work in this moment is organizing the narrative and challenging, continuing to challenge the big lie as a way of encouraging people to participate in our elections as a part of holding up our society.
Thank you so much. I could listen to you all day and say, and you too, Taylor. I'm going to quickly share my screen again and just do a couple more slides to show people actually how to make the donations, and then we will open it up for Q&A, and we'll stick around. I will stick around for as long as people have questions. So when you go to the Crimson Ghost Blueprint portfolio page on our website, you will see a lot more information about the different groups and candidates that we're supporting. And the first thing you can do is pick an amount of money that you want to give. And once you do that, you will see, like, let's say you choose $1,000, which would make me very happy, of course. You will see that we have made an allocation selection for where that $1,000 goes. So you can see 40% goes to the grassroots groups, and then we have a bunch of different candidates and money that we're putting in congressional funds so that as soon as we have a Democratic nominee, that money will go to them. And you will get this allocated ahead. But if you want to change any of the allocations, like you say, wow, I heard NSAID today and I want to give more money to Georgia, then maybe you would up this amount and lower it somewhere else in the portfolio. So you can customize it however you want. And then you click donate. So with one easy payment, you're giving to all these different possibilities. And after you hit donate, you will see a little thing will pop up and it'll say, would you like us to share your information with the campaigns that you've just donated to? And you have the option to say no. And that way you won't get a million solicitations from all the different candidates the way you do if you go to their website and donate. So if you want the solicitations, you can have them, but a lot of people have told us that that's like one of the most attractive features about the Blueprint portfolio. And I'll just say that, you know, in the 2020 election, we raised $320,000. Most of the money went to down ballot races and to civic organizations, and most of the money went to close races. Like the Blueprint targeted them very well, much better than, you know, the average Democratic donation. And we have found that people love this tool, so we also want everybody to share it with everybody they know who makes political donations. Look on it as a gift to your friends. That's how they have taken it. So you don't have to be a fundraiser. You have to be someone who says, look, I know you donate to political causes. Here's an instrument that lets you do it really smartly and not waste your money. We have this very bold goal of trying to raise $1 million for the 2022 midterms, and we can't do that alone. We really need help from everybody's networks. Also on that page on our website, we have a sample letter that you can, all written for you, that you can send to your friends, you know, saying, I heard about this thing and I want to share it with you. So you don't even have to pen your own. So we are going to answer some questions now. The link will be in the chat, of course. We hope you guys will all give, and we'll come back after the questions to give you one more opportunity to donate. So Joe is our intern, and he's been watching the chat for questions for me and Taylor, and maybe Adam if there's a question I don't know the answer to. Susan, thank you. I gave, it was easy peasy. I love that. Joe, are there questions in the chat?
Yes, there are a number of questions, and I'm also trying to get everyone else spotlighted. But kicking things off, we have a question from Eleanor LeCain, who asked, what do you need to win Georgia? Is it more money?
Ensa, you want to take that?
Yeah, I think in order to win Georgia, we're going to have an army of lawyers and volunteers who will be the eyes and ears as we sort of try to neutralize voter suppression in real time. I think that we're going to have overwhelming participation in our elections in order to overcome some of the voter suppression tactics that we've seen, particularly with these changes in the laws. And yeah, like that's the only thing that's going to be able to overcome, again, some of the tools that they've given themselves. I think that we need to win in Georgia to be competing with sharp and pointy elbows for public narrative. I think, again, as the information wells that people use to get information about the world around us are being poisoned, getting better and smarter about how we compete in a really noisy environment to capture eyeballs and ears and people's hearts, minds, and attention. Like those feel like the big tactical things that need to exist at scale for as many organizations as possible in order for us to win in Georgia. And yes, those things do cost money.
Can I add also for the Crimson Goes Blue members in the audience, we have a Georgia team. So we want people out there registering voters, being poll watchers. We also have an election protection team, and that team is working hard on Georgia. Two of our members actually run the Democratic Party hotline volunteers. So if you want to get trained to man the voter hotline, we got you covered. So yeah, we're all in for Georgia. Other questions, Joe?
Actually, Janet, I'm going to give Joe a break. My name is John Reese. I'm a Crimson Goes Blue member and have been coordinating efforts to spread the word about our Crimson Goes Blue print portfolio. We had an early question from Jane Foreman about whether any election administrator type positions, Secretary of State and that sort of thing, had been identified as promising targets for investment. So I don't know, Janet, if you'd like to address how the portfolio addresses that aspect.
Yeah, well, as you heard Nsé say, you know, they work on voter protection as well. We don't have Secretary of State races in our portfolio, but when you look at voter protection, there's a lot of races that count. So state legislature has control in many states over how elections are certified, as does the governor. So we have targeted, like in our last, the Q1, we did the governor in Wisconsin because of that. We've got the state ledge in both Pennsylvania and Georgia that we're supporting. So yeah, I mean, secretaries of state too are great to support. They're not in the portfolio right now, but election protection and integrity is on the docket for sure.
All right, and there were one or two general questions in the chat that someone chimed in to respond, but might be worth putting on the air for those who hadn't been following it closely. Harry Oster was asking, when you mentioned supporting candidates for the U.S. Senate from Pennsylvania, which Senate candidate in Pennsylvania you're supporting?
Yeah, so we support the nominee. We don't endorse anybody in the primary for a couple reasons. One, we believe the communities should choose their nominee, and then we'll support them. Two, especially Crimson Goes Blue, we have a broad range of, you know, who's supporting who in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has one of the most competitive Senate races, and there's 3 people in there who could all potentially win that. But what happens when you have a competitive primary like is happening there is the people running in the primary spend down all their money trying to win the primary, and then the general election starts, and they have nothing. So we take that money and we hand it to them the second that there's a nominee. So I hope that answers your question. We're definitely not picking a primary candidate.
Okay, I've got a very a kind of insider technical question here from Tara in North Carolina. She says, I noticed NGP hires canvassers at $20 an hour. I'm with groups in North Carolina trying to raise money to pay canvassers. Does New Georgia Project or does Taylor have any data on the effectiveness of paid versus volunteer canvassers, or effectiveness of paying canvassers versus mailers, TV spots? If there is data, is it public? Can it be shared with organizations of similar FEC status? That's way over my head.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Taylor, I'll take this one.
We're thrilled that you're going to take this one.
Okay. There's tons of data out there about the relative efficacy of different field tactics. So phones versus text versus face-to-face conversations, etc. I will tell you that, knowing what I know just about how humans communicate, right, that high quality face-to-face conversations, there's no substitute for it. And then it goes down the ladder of engagement. I think that the types of tactics, so the mode of communication matters, but it doesn't matter as much as frequency. And so, you know, we have a program that we call our 10 touches. And so we're trying to get 10 touches each cycle with the people that the New Georgia Project has registered to vote. And so that could be 2 text messages, you know, 5 door knock attempts, 3 phone calls. And then that's 10 touches, 10 attempts to touch you per cycle. So mode and frequency matter, absolutely. And paid canvassing versus volunteer canvassing. Listen, I will say volunteers are by far our most precious resource and they're important, but there's something qualitatively different about what volunteers are able to accomplish versus what you can do with the staff in terms of training, in terms of insights, in terms of feedback and making sure that we're having a feedback loop and a conversation with voters, retention. You know, we all have competing personal and professional obligations. And again, staffing a canvas with people who see this as their work versus staffing a canvas with people who are giving you their time is just fundamentally different. And then I think that we absolutely have seen an improvement with the quality of canvasser when we stop paying poverty wages, and that we have been holding sort of ourselves accountable, and being the type of employer that we are advocating large companies become. You know, we can't be in the streets talking about the fight for 15 when our canvassers are being paid less than that. So for that reason and many, many more, you know, our canvassers, as we have increased pay and given folks access to benefits, they have, you know, the ladder of employment. Canvassers have become organizers and other professional staff. Again, people have quit their second jobs. And so they were getting better engagement, much more commitment to the work, much more creativity from canvassers as the sort of frontline representatives of New Georgia Project out in the communities that we organize with. And so, yes, without question, not paying poverty wages allows us to recruit better canvassers and retain them as a part of an early career in doing this kind of work.
Well, and I want to give credit to Tara because she has moved to North Carolina and is canvassing full-time in addition to leading our North Carolina team. So, you know, she's the real deal.
I like it. And what I mean by the feedback loop, Tara, is that when a canvasser goes out with a script, they're often asking questions of voters. Do they have a plan to vote? But also asking them questions about particular issues. And the canvassers take that information and bring it back. We upload it into a database, and we're using it to build out richer profiles of voters, because people will tell you how they identify. I'm a climate voter, I'm a wages voter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I want to give a shout out that we've raised $4,000 from 11 people so far. Woohoo! And we know we have a few bigger pledges to coming in as well. So thank you everybody who has donated. How are we? It's 3:56. So maybe we have time for one more question, but I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to give. John, do you want to say one more word about that?
I will. My name is John Reese. I help coordinate this effort to spread the word about Blueprint. I haven't missed voting in a midterm since 1982. That's 50 years and ouch. But when I look back after all those years, I can't think of any one where the stakes were higher than this one. And so if, like me, you plan on giving to Democratic candidates causes this year, there's no better time to start than now. And we really do think there's no better way to do it than through the Crimson Goes Blueprint portfolio. So please join us in whatever amount feels right to you. There's a donation link in the chat. And just as important, please help us spread the word. We promise not to flood you with spam, but my mother did teach me to send thank you notes, and you will get a thank you note from us. You'll get one thanking you for joining us today. And when you donate, we'll thank you for that too. All you need to do is forward one of our messages to any of your friends and family members who might be thinking about political donations this year, and encourage them to follow your example, or even just take a look at the Blueprint portfolio. You'll be doing them a favor. And finally, for any current or prospective Crimson Goes Blueprint or Blue members who are here today, if you'd like to join the amazing group of volunteers we have working on the Blueprint Action Team, we'd love to have you. Send me an email. I just put my email address in the chat as well. Or nope, here we go. About to put it in.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Everybody for coming today. And thank you, Nsé and Taylor, for the inspiration. Yeah.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thank
All
you.
Thanks.
I'll stick around for a few minutes if anyone has any other questions.